Okay, everybody. If there's one thing that we hate, it's when the government decides who are the winners and who are the losers. And it's probably time for all of you to get a little bit outraged, especially if you live in Compton. I mean, think about these number of case files that have been purged, that no longer exist, the murders that were committed, and those case files don't exist. The sheriffs, when they take over, only have 24 open murder investigation. When Compton PD was in charge, they had 275 murder cases that were open. What happened to those case files? Those case files were purged from the evidence. They were purged before the turnover happened. Y'all should be outraged over that. But more importantly, we just listened to Suge's podcast, and we know the government is deciding winners and losers. Suge Knight's building gets embezzled from him, and the person who embezzles it, nothing happens to. It's a fraudulent conveyance. That was brought out in the bankruptcy court. He was in hot water for about 15 minutes, and then they decided not to press charges against that person that embezzled the building. And it's the same person that we see with fingerprints over all this stuff. The same person that gets the phone call and from Kevin Hackey saying Bobby Finch is dead. And he goes, I already know. What? It just happened like 3-4 minutes ago. How do you already know? It's the same person who catches a case out of Tennessee. And what happens? He gets special treatment. Anybody else caught that case, they'd be sitting under the prison right now. He goes into that prison and gets a slap on the wrist, basically. The bond that's issued so that he can get out of jail while he's pending his trial. It's not a real bond even. Giles, who put up the money, is guaranteed he's going to get his money back, and that's interlineated because he gets special treatment. Y'all should start to get outraged by these 137 informants that just seem to walk. The fact that there was a man who committed a felony and went after Suge Knight and started beating on him. He should have been charged with Terry Carter's murder, but nothing happens to him because why? He's protected. There's a class of people that are protected. They are the 137 informants. They are who the government decides are going to be the winners, and then the government also decides who the losers are going to be. And we're seeing this play out in our country right now. There are 2 tiers of justice in this system. And if you're not on the right side of it, then you're getting the shit end of the stick, as they say. You're getting the shit end of the stick. What happened to liberty and justice for all? It's just a myth, unless we all stand up and demand it. Every single one of you needs to stand up and demand justice. This same person seen on the MGM tape. This same person having his car driven by Buntry when Buntry's killed. This same person being seen picking up Vince Buchanan and then, blamed for Vince Buchanan's death. Vince Buchanan is picked up at 135th and Central. How many of you guys know Compton? That's right across from Pyru Street. If the police picked up somebody who was known at Pyru Street and Central, and that's really what we should be talking about because it's right across from Pyru Street. Do you think nobody saw who picked up Vince Buchanan and then he gets dumped at Greenleaf and Central? He gets dumped at Greenleaf and Central with shots to the back of his head, and he's handcuffed. And the rumors swirl around that it's this person that's done that killing. And there are many other things that have happened, and including that man's father was involved in coercing testimony to get Regis Dion Thomas. Let me say that again, because it's important. That man has been accused, that man's father has been accused of coercing testimony to get a conviction on Regis Dion Thomas in the Burrell McDonald killings. Y'all got to start looking at this. How many rumors does there have to be before you realize that you have a rabid dog in your midst? And sometimes, in the words of Christy Nome, the dog needs to be put down. And I'm not advocating that we go out there and do any killing or any of that type of stuff, but I am advocating that if everybody stood up and just demanded justice and said to the government, hey, we're no longer comfortable with you deciding who the winners and who the losers are going to be. It's time for liberty and justice for all on a micro scale. That means you go before a judge, it's impartial. That means you get a traffic ticket, it's impartial. That means, you are out there amongst the people and something goes wrong. You can rely on the justice system. And right now, I have a very healthy distrust for this justice system when I see what happened in Compton. And let's not forget, they're all just people. There are people at the courthouses. There's people, the lawyers are just people. The politicians, just people. But when you start to see patterns of behavior over and over and over again, and nothing gets done because the government has decided who the winners and the losers are, there is a problem. There needs to be outrage, and y'all need to wake up and start standing up, because this is not how America is supposed to be. It's supposed to be that if you work hard, you save your money, you buy a house, you make good, you put a business together, it starts to make money, that you become successful, and that nobody can take that success away from you. But when it's easier to be a thief and embezzle a building to get rich than it is to go out there and work hard and create a record label and create amazing music, then there's something seriously wrong with our system. We no longer value the person who risks it all to put together a business to make good. We no longer value a person who, as an educator, decides he wants to run for mayor to make a difference in his community, and he cleans things up. We go after that person. We try him twice for the same crime. And y'all know who I'm talking about. I don't need to mention names. We try him twice for the same crime, even though he wins it on appeal. He goes and has his election contest overturned in a judge, and there's appeal heard days later. And I've been the part of an appeal that went to the appellate court and then went to the California Supreme Court. It took months to get to the California Supreme Court, but not for this man. No, he gets reseated by a sitting judge, and then on appeal, days later, he's unseated again, because the contest that was fraudulent, and there are fraudulent contests. Don't let anybody lie to you and say, all elections are fair. There's a huge incentive to go after those election contests because there's so much money involved. So don't let anybody tell you that the election contests are all fair. Betty Boop voted, Mickey Mouse voted, Donald Duck voted. There were all these votes that were cast that were illegal votes, and the election contest was overturned by a judge who had overseen elections with the UN. She knew what an election contest was supposed to look like. He gets put back into office. He has to exhaust his pension. He has to exhaust his equity in his home. He ends up penniless. And then the DA, who actually unseated him illegally, goes after him. And he gets tried twice for the same crime. He gets it overturned on appeal, and then he gets charged a second time. Out of money, out of options, no choice but to just let the conviction stand. And by this point, they've taken 20 years of this man's life. And it's time for y'all to decide, what kind of America do you want? Do you want 251 murder files to be purged when the handoff happens? Do you want to let that stand? Or do you want to stand up and demand that they go back and investigate all these murders, that they reconstruct this? Because now it's time for you to demand this. It's time for the Gary Beverly murder to be solved. Death threat the night before, murder the next day with somebody who looks just like Omar. It's time for the Bobby Finch murder to be solved. A bodyguard murdered, 13 shots, 12 shots hits his body. He's murdered right after the Tupac shooting when Suge's looking for new security. I mean, wake up. This stuff is not that hard to solve. Gordon Martin said, hey, murder's simple. The first person you go after is the spouse. It's time for y'all to see a building stolen, a record label stolen, and there's a confession letter. I didn't make this stuff up. I'm not the one who said the building was fraudulently conveyed. I'm not the one who said that it was a wife and the head of security that was going after Tupac and Suge. I didn't say that. That's a confession letter that was written in 1998. I didn't say that it was this person who went after Vince Buchanan. People saw that shit. People saw who killed Gary Beverly, and the Compton PD suppressed it. The Compton PD, they suppressed the witnesses in the Snoop murder trial. The shell casings go missing out of Pacific Division in the Snoop murder trial, stolen by LAPD Rampart scandal cops. It's time that you wake up. Evidence gets scuttled, gets ripped off. Evidence gets purged from the files. The files get purged. This is the America that we live in. And it's time for y'all to wake up and decide, what kind of America do you want to live in? And demand that we have good representation. Demand that school person who's working for the district and decides that he wants to help out his community and he wants to do good for the people, who has suitcases pushed over to him full of cash and says, no, thank you, I don't want your money. I want you to build something. Build a weight room. Add a room onto a school. Build a park. Help the roads. Donate money to the city. That's the person that we want representing us. Not the person who's got, Swiss accounts or cryptocurrency that you can put the money into, or that's running dope out the back door while stuff is going out the front door. That's not who you want. You want people who are good people, who are for the people. And you got to demand that shit. That shit just isn't going to happen. You have to demand it. You have to demand it. I see these Compton PDs have been up there, and they get out there and they talk and they go on and on and on about how great things were under Compton PD and how Orlando shot at them, and if he shot at them, why didn't he get arrested for it? If they knew Orlando shot them or shot at them, then why not put Orlando in prison? No, Orlando was a patsy. Orlando was at that car wash. And who was on that scene? The father of that person I've been talking about, the guy who conveyed the building. He's there A minute after the shooting, because everybody hears it in Compton, it's like all kinds of shots fired. A minute after, they're there. And the Compton PD show up, the paramedics show up. Orlando's already dead. This whole thing about how he gave a deathbed confession that he killed Tupac and then died, that never happened. How do we know? Because he was so shot up. He was killed instantly. So what do we know? That by the time, a minute later, that the paramedics and that the police showed up, that person, Senior, the father of the guy who ran security, was already there and looked like he had been there. And you just can't have this stuff that goes on and on and on. The same guy who's investigating all these murders, nothing, he didn't even go to prison over all this stuff out of Tennessee. He just got a slap on the wrist. Oh, he got a conviction. So he is a convicted drug dealer and money launderer. But what is he? He's also the guy who was the head of homicides at the time. 251 case files get purged, and y'all let that shit happen.